Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. Someone commented on one of my other videos and asked if I could make a video regarding the Genesis weapon, the liberation process, as well as the Genesis Pass that we currently have available. And I do feel like it's something that can be confusing, so here we are. So first off, let's start with what is the Genesis weapon. It is a level 200 weapon that you unlock once you reach Limina at level 255. The quest to unlock it is after the Destined battle, and it should appear in your quest light bulb for you to initially claim the weapon. The weapon does start as a sealed version of your Genesis weapon and really isn't useful at this stage, but it can undergo 2 stages of awakening, which once completed unlocks the weapon's full potential. The process of awakening the weapon is called liberation, or lib for short. Now, how do we liberate the weapon? If you open the Liberation UI, which can be done either from the GeniPass tab or from your quest light bulb, here you can see all of the steps towards liberation, which are all quests essentially. Some of the steps are just talking quests, so we can ignore those, and we'll go over the main ones which we want to focus on, which are the 8 liberation missions, which are steps 3, 4, 6, and 7, and 9 through 12. Each liberation mission does have 2 parts to it. The first part is a boss fight with one of Black Mage's commanders that have modifiers attached to them, essentially trying to make the fight more difficult than the normal boss fight. I guess the Varishilla mission is kind of an exception, but you'll see when we get there. And you can access the liberation fight by going to the boss and selecting the liberation difficulty for whichever mission you're on. You won't see the liberation difficulty if you are not on that current mission. So what are the modifiers? As you can see here, there's a whole list of things, but I'll summarize the first 4 right here. First boss is Hard Von Leon. You do have to solo him with a 90% final damage reduction on you. And the only equips you can use going into the fight are the sealed Genesis weapon and your secondary, which does take a lot of your stat away. But if your secondary is good, you should be fine. Next up is normal Archaeum, which we also have to solo. The final damage reduction is 75%, and same thing, you can only use your Jenny weapon and your secondary. The third fight is Hard Magnus, same thing, solo, minus 50% final damage, and only your Jenny weapon and your secondary. From here, it does change a little bit, and the fourth boss is Hard Lotus. You still have to solo him. The final damage decrease is only 20%, but at this point, they do let you use all of your normal equipment. Those are the first 4 fights. We'll go over the next 4 in a bit here. Let's go ahead and explain the second part of each of the liberation missions, which is collecting traces of darkness. Here is a table of the amount of traces needed to complete each mission, and on the right here is a table showing the weekly bosses that drop these traces and how many traces each one of them gives. Just keep in mind though that if you do fight them in a party, the amount of traces that you earn is divided by the number of people in your party. So for example, if you clear Black Mage, which gives 600 points in a 6-man party, each of you gets 100 traces each. But essentially here, you want to try and clear the hardest level bosses you can each week to earn the most amount of traces to fill up the gauge and clear each mission. Also, now you are able to hold up to 3,000 traces, so if you do go over the 500 or 1,000 that is required for your current mission, the excess will carry over onto the next quest. Of course, try not to go over 3,000 because you will lose those points. Once you've beaten the boss and collected enough traces, you can go ahead and press complete and move on to the next step in the Liberation quest line. After the first 4 lib missions are completed, you reach step 8, which is the first awakening of your Genesis weapon. Here, the weapon gains the Tenadian Ruin skill, which increases your final damage by 10%. But the weapon still doesn't have potential or stars, so honestly, at this stage, it really isn't useful most of the time. However, in the current Challenger world, with the Ignitia set effect from item burning, there is argument that it might be useful over the challenger weapon until you are able to fully liberate. We're not entirely sure yet, as most people are getting to that point right now. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see what the testing shows. But anyways, for the most part, don't worry about the weapon still at this point. Steps 9 through 12 are the next 4 liberation missions and do require 1,000 traces each. And we'll go over the 4 bosses and the modifiers right here. The first one is Hard Damien, which you again do have to solo. And the modifier for this fight is your death count is reduced from 10 to 5. The next boss is Hard Will, where it does change a little bit, and you can either solo it or you have the choice to duo the boss. And his other modifier is you take 10% increased damage from his attacks. Next up is Hard Lucid, which again you can solo or duo, and her modifier is you can't use more than 50 consumables for the fight, which is essentially 50 potions. And the very last boss is Hard Varicilla, which again you can solo or duo. The modifier here actually makes the fight easier because I think soloing Hilla was really hard back then. So they did decrease her HP by 25%. And a few quick notes for doing the fight as a party. It does require that both players are on the same quest line. So you can't just bring someone random with you. You both have to be at that stage of liberation. And also there is a 50% final damage decrease for both players. And lastly, you both have to clear. If either one of you dies out of the fight, it doesn't count. With that being said, once you complete all of that and you get to step 13, congratulations! Step 13 is a talking quest line where you perform the second awakening and obtain your fully liberated Genesis weapon. The weapon does automatically come Star Force to 22 stars and gains the Aeonian Rise skill, or what most people call the Jenny iframe, which is a 10-second long iframe with a 2-minute cooldown. From here, like all other equipment, you can use your flames and cubes on it to get the stats you want on your weapon. You will be using this weapon from here on out, so don't feel bad about investing into the weapon, because the next upgrade is the Destiny weapon, which basically just takes your current Genesis weapon and upgrades that. The Destiny weapon process is insanely deep into endgame and not the topic of this video, so we'll go ahead and move on. So yeah, now that we've explained the liberation process, what does the Genesis Pass do, and is it really worth buying? So if you look at the Genesis Pass UI here, you see it does 4 things essentially. The first thing is it does increase the amount of traces you get while killing bosses by 3, which essentially expedites your liberation process by a lot. The Pass UI does say it turns an 11-week process into 4 weeks, and while the math does technically check out, this is under like perfect conditions, which a majority of players won't fit into, especially in Challenger World. But let's just consider perfect conditions for this example. So to complete liberation, you do need a total of 6,500 traces throughout all of the missions. If you solo all of the highest difficulty bosses each week, you get a total of 470 traces, which in 11 weeks gives you 5,170 traces. After that, if you solo Black Mage once a month, you do get 600 traces each time, and 11 weeks spans 3 months, so 1,800 points. That put together does put you over that 6,500 mark with some wiggle room to complete liberation. With the Liberation Pass, you basically multiply all of that by 3. So if you do the same weekly bosses, you get 1,410 traces instead, and in 4 weeks, you would get 5,640. And in a 4-week period, it's either Black Mage once or twice, depending on when you start the process, but once is enough because it gives you 1,800 points and puts you over the 6,500 requirement. So yeah, if again, under perfect conditions, it does take an 11-week process and turn it into a 4-week process. But not everyone can clear all these bosses solo, so the timeline does change depending on which bosses you can beat. There is a really nice liberation calculator, which I'll link down below if you want to check out. And for my example here, This is my own liberation. I'm currently at the Magnus mission with 125 traces. And because I don't know how to do Black Mage and I am solo progging, I don't think I'll be able to solo Black Mage anytime soon, so I miss out on those points. So if I just clear all the way up to C10 each week, the process would take me 13 weeks from here. But if we click the Jenny Pass toggle here, it changes to make me liberate in only 5 weeks, which to me is crazy fast. Again, the timeline and the amount this actually speeds you up does change depending on which bosses you're reaching, but at the end of the day, just know the pass expedites this process by a lot. The second part of the Challenger Pass is that for the Liberation bosses that can be duoed, it does expand that to be able to be done in a full party of 6, while maintaining the 50% final damage reduction, which essentially can triple your damage output in a fight and potentially makes the Liberation missions easier for those who are unable or uncomfortable with soloing and duoing those fights. The third part here is it does provide a Trace of Darkness buff when fighting any boss that does drop the traces, meaning you get this buff for Lotus and Damien, Lucid and Will, Chaos Tenny, and Black Mage. And I'll list the buff right here. It is a relatively solid buff and can push you to start clearing the higher tier bosses a little faster, especially this extra arcane power, which can help you reach the arcane force requirements and damage thresholds for the higher tier bosses. And last but not least is it does give you a guaranteed magnificent attack or magic attack weapon soul when you liberate. The box also lets you choose which boss soul you want for the aesthetics. I'll put them all up right here if you want to see what they all look like. This does take away the whole RNG fest that comes from trying to get magnificent souls and trying to get a magnificent attack soul on top of that. And in my opinion, this box alone is worth the price of the pass. So do I think this pass is worth it? I personally do, again, because of this soul box, and getting your endgame weapon a little faster helps you clear content faster. Of course, the worth is completely up to you. You can still liberate and get the right soul just fine without using this pass. But yeah, that sums up the Genesis Pass, the weapon, and its liberation missions. Hopefully that explained it well enough for you guys to understand. And if it did help you out, please hit that like button. And if there's anything else you'd like me to make videos on, please let me know down below. Anyways, thanks for watching. Y'all have a good one. Peace.